Go. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to another narrator interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And joining me today is a very special narrator, making her not only her official debut on the Wandering Scribe podcast, but making her first official podcast interview ever. Now, my guest today is a voice actor who primarily produces audiobooks, specializing in romance and fantasy, but she also narrates in nonfiction as well as other genres as well. Her educational background is in biology with a minor in Spanish, making her an excellent choice for challenging scientific texts and bilingual literature. And if you follow me on social media, you'll remember that there was a movement called Human Voices. Now, for those who don't know what that is, that was a big push by narrators to really showcase their talent in the wake of AI in the voiceover world. And my guest today had honestly made me smile. She read a segment which I submitted to her from Michael, Last Angel of Earth, and she gave such life to the character Margret. She did such an incredible job. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, voice actor, narrator extraordinaire, and incredible human being, Miss Daphne Winters. Daphne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
You're welcome, Daphne. You're welcome. Now, before we dive into some of the work you have done in your career, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners?
Maybe just that I record a lot of spicy romance. That seems to be where I've fallen. And you can find that work under Daphne Winters. But if you're looking for a young adult or no spice, maybe I have a couple thrillers under Daphne Rivers as well. So I have some interest for anyone.
Nice. Very, very nice. Now, just as a little teaser for some of your acting talent, are there any books you would like to name drop that you've been a part of, either ones you've done in the past or ones that you are currently working on?
Ooh, yes. I recently worked with Chad Fox on This Must Be the Place by Beth Curry. And that is under my Daphne Rivers pseudonym. And it was like a mystery thriller where you didn't really know quite what was happening. There's a little bit of paranormal suspense in there too.
Ooh.
And we duetted it because he originally got the project and he thought, I think Daphne would make a great addition to this project to bring out these characters. And so we asked his author, and then he brought me in on the project. And so I got to voice some really fun characters in that project. As far as solo work, I've recently been working with Cassandra Mall, who is a wonderful human being, and she's hysterical. She's a mother of a bunch of little girls, and she's so funny, and her texts are romance, but I think they're more of rom-coms, because if you're at all like an awkward, funny person, like I feel like I'm really awkward sometimes, and then you just have to laugh at yourself. I loved her romance comedy texts. She's a great writer, and I think everyone should check her out.
Awesome. I'll make sure to include those down below in the description of this video, my viewers and listeners. So, Daphne, let's talk a little bit about you and your journey into the voice acting world and the world of narration. So, let's start at the beginning. What sort of pushed you on this path? Were you always very creative? Were you always, creating worlds in your head? Or did that sort of come about from a third party, so to speak?
I've always been a reader. I read a ton all throughout probably my childhood. I loved Goosebumps in my childhood. I've always been on that spooky edge. In high school and middle school, I read a ton. And in high school, I finally got to like Stephen King. I loved
Ooh, okay.
I still listen to him and read him. I really loved C.C. Hunter's Shadow Fall series. That's like a nostalgia series for me. and I still will read it. I have the books on my mantle of the books that you can still get in text, and then some of them are only ebooks now. But I also will listen back to that series sometimes, like how some people will rewatch. I listen to that series again.
Nice. That's amazing, Daphne. That is incredible. So now, what would you consider your aha moment when you realize that you want to take your passion for creativity and build upon to dive into the work of narration? Or actually, let's start with there. What pushed you to actually go into the world of narration?
My husband. Absolutely my husband. So I worked with the US Forest Service for a couple of years because I have a master's in biology. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's where I was working, but it was a seasonal job. So at the end of the season,
Ah,
I was finishing up my job. I was like, man, what am I gonna do now? Um, and we were listening to a book together in the car on the way to wherever we were going. And he goes, "You should do this." I was like, "You're funny." Sure, whatever. Uh, he said, "No, I'm serious. I think you would be great at this." And I jumped in head first, and here I am today. I never would have guessed that I'd be where I am today, honestly.
really? That's actually very fascinating. And honestly, I don't know what it is, but I've heard that similar story from a lot of other people, not just narrators, but also authors as well. Case in point, M. Fire. I guess I want to say a year ago, she actually, she's a mother, she has a daughter, and her daughter kind of made a bet with her and called her out saying, I will do this if you write your stories. And, from that discussion, she's been a writer ever since. And I honestly just love those little interactions where it's like, oh, you would honestly be really good at this. And then boom, it just expands and allows all these incredible opportunities, because it is scary going to something new, especially the world of narration. And I've talked with a few narrators on the show. I've had of course, Sophia Dujardin, which many of our viewers remember was actually the first narrator which I had on the Wandering Tribe, and she's also a good friend to not just myself but also to Daphne and many other people of the Audio Maze family. And it's really interesting to sort of break the myths about the narration world and the voice acting world, which we will touch on in a little bit. So now let's jump ahead into your first work that you've ever done in the world of narration. So walk me through it, Daphne. You're working with your first author, your first client, and they've given you the characters or the character that they want you to voice. You've read the synopsis, gone over this character's backstory. When you made a decision that, yes, I'm going to be a part of this, what were the goals you had for yourself as the narrator, but also the promise you're making to your I should say to the fans of the authors? And what I mean by that is, for authors writing their books, they have this promise to their fans that, oh, this book is going to be this. When you have editors, I'm going to make sure the book flows and really shines for the author. For narrators, at least from an author's perspective, I would imagine the promise is, I'm going to try to bring this character to life as best I can, but I also may add my own spin to it to make him or her a little different. Was it almost that way for you?
I wanted to produce good sounding audio, right? Because
Mm,
there's some audio out there that has a lot of background noise, or there's a lot of mouth noise, and it's just very distracting for the
right.
listener. So I would say I primarily wanted it to be good audio, but then
Hmm.
I wanted to be true to my author's work.
Yeah.
So I I know the amount of time that authors dedicate to books. Some
Hmm.
are thinking about them for years before they ever put them into paper.
Mm-hmm.
So handing that over to someone else to try and bring to life, I imagine it's hard to let go in a lot of circumstances and just be like, okay, I have to trust this person to do this. So I always want to do the best with where I'm at, right? Because every day I'm a better narrator. I
Right.
always want to improve, which means, unfortunately, that I'm, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, that I'm better today than I was when I started.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's hard to look back at work and still be proud of it when I know where I am now. But I've always been
Mm.
a highly self-critical person.
Right.
So I always want to do the best with where I'm at. I always want to make characters able to be differentiated. I want their personalities to come through and how I voice them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's my
That is very
approach.
true. That is actually very, very true. And, it goes into this whole discussion for narrators of, as you said, the background noise, you want to be very professional because a lot of people, especially if you're not in either the publishing world or the voice acting world, they think it's just, you're just making silly voices. And I've debunked that myth several times with other narrators on not just this show, but also Into the Maze. And it is acting, it is researching, especially if it's a specific type of character. Because for authors, we just give narrators just the descriptions of what this character looks like. This character is this years old. He or she is this tall. They have either an old injury on their throat, which hampers their speech. Maybe they have a slur when they speak. That's a lot of stuff. And that's when narrators, as we would touch on later, really have to figure out, am I the best for this role? And sometimes we have to make a uh, a call whether or not do I do this or do I not. And then sometimes whenever either for a narrator or authors or editors working on a very special project, we get so giddy that we can't wait to share with people, but sometimes we sometimes don't want to share because we don't want to have it just go away, that mystery. And what I mean by that is, as an author, it took me a long time to really share with people what I was working on, a project that I've been passionate about for a long time. I imagine it's all the same thing for narrators, because it is a long time honing your craft, really figuring out the characters, and then setting aside time to work on this and not telling friends or family what you're doing until the final product. So for you, Daphne, when did you reach the point that you could tell your friends and family what you were doing?
I would say I'm a pretty open person in general.
Mhm.
Like I am very open with my family. Not that they always listen to everything I do, especially since a lot of my work is spicy and some family members are like, "Yeah, I'm not listening to that," which totally fair
Mhm.
for them. But I have also friends of mine that are like, "Heck yeah, give me that audio." But I I don't know that I hid it from anyone or refrained from sharing just because that's just who I am. I'm just very open with the people that I have around me, but I also have to feel like I have a good connection with people around me to share, if that makes sense.
Yes, that absolutely does. And that's actually very good that you actually have a very good, group of people and family that, are very interested and very passionate about your work as well as very supportive. And from your first project that you worked on, what was the initial reaction like from friends and family who listened to the narration as well as readers? And we should actually probably talk about, or at least mention, what was the first project you worked on as a narrator and voice actor?
So I don't know that anyone has listened to my very first project.
Oh,
And
okay.
because of because of, as I've already admitted, I'm very self-critical. I am totally okay with that. And I honestly think most narrators would prefer that no one listen to their very first project. There's going to be anomalies, but I would
Right.
say all of us have that same feeling about where we started. We're like, woof. I'm glad I started, but I also don't want to share that. But I would say my fourth project was when I was really comfortable to share my actual work.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. That
So
makes sense.
yeah, my initial feedback on that project was you did pretty good. I think there were moments where you could have had a little more energy, a little bit more emotion in your text and like what you read at times, but by and large it was good. And I was like, great. I can work on putting more emotion into it. I can work on changing my delivery to make it smoother, to be more interesting. And so that's where I went with it.
Awesome. And that's a fun little question. I don't think I've asked this question for a narrator in a very long time, but I think it is important. Do you do any vocal exercises to get your voice ready for a very long work day?
Hmm. Vocal exercises. I would say I do not have a strict regimen before
Okay.
I record. If I haven't talked to anyone yet, like because my husband works in different time zones sometimes, I haven't spoken to him. So then I haven't talked to anyone all morning. And if that's the case, then I will sing along usually to some music that I like. Um, and pick up a few things around the house while I'm warming up speaking. I really like Noah Kahan's music, the Northern Attitudes, because in
Hmm.
that song he jumps between notes, and
Oh, okay.
I feel like it helps warm me up because I also try and emulate that. I will say I am not nearly as good of a singer as him, but I try and sing along.
Awesome. Well, that's actually really, really cool, Daphne. And this actually kind of leads to the next question, which is the first of many reflective questions. So I'll give some context for this part. Just like authors and editors, I imagine with narrators, especially if they're working on their first project that they are really going to showcase their acting abilities, their voice narration, there is, I would imagine, that hesitancy and nervousness, especially if it's, let's say, a book that's been out for a very long time. It's very beloved. It's been acclaimed by numerous organizations. And now the authors decide, I'm now going to go on the next step is make an audiobook and get a team of narrators to voice all of these characters. And I imagine that would be a lot of anxiety and kind of intimidation for narrators, no matter, what their skill levels are, their experience, because readers have that expectation of that character. They've imagined what the character sounds like and so forth. And in today's digital age, it is both a blessing as well as a curse. And what I mean by that is just like authors who are showcasing their work on social media, whether their latest book update or stuff like that, narrators, the ones I've seen and follow, they showcase their talents, they showcase their work for numerous projects. Yours, for example, that you and I were able to work on was the Michael segment, which again I absolutely love. That was incredible. But I imagine there is that nervousness to showcase in the sense that, well, yes, on one side, you're going to meet great people who are very passionate about the craft, fellow readers who are very intrigued and invested. And it's like, oh, you'd be perfect for my story, or I have a character that you would love. On the other side, unfortunately, we leave ourselves open to a lot of negativity, hate speech, trolls, spam, and so forth. And that can be very detrimental to a person's mental health and overall well being. And then, of course, imposter syndrome is always going to be there. I don't care what anyone says, imposter syndrome is the bane of all creative individuals, authors, editors, narrators, artists, what have you. It's always going to be there. So, this is a two-part question, Daphne. In your career, have you ever had moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome whenever you worked on a new project? And from your first project to now, what has disciplined you to continue honing your craft and building up your skill sets?
I think imposter syndrome for sure has been very difficult because for me, a lot of narrators have acting background.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I don't. And while that has not seemed to hinder me, at least not to a large extent that I've noticed.
Right.
I have taken acting classes since I've started, but I
Mm.
don't have 20 years of theater experience, or I haven't been doing plays since middle school through high school and in college.
Right.
That's not part of my background. I'm a biologist. Well, now I'm a narrator, but I did biology for like 6 years. So, imposter syndrome gets me quite often because I know that there are many other people who have so many years more experience, and here I am, and I've actually I've been a part of 20 book projects in a little over a year. So I'm doing something right, but that doesn't mean my brain doesn't go, "Yep,
Congratulations.
all these people have more experience."
Wow. That first off, congratulations. That is huge. 20 projects in a year. That is amazing. And I would imagine that, as this discussion of, anxiety and really wanting to give the best that you can, because that is, again, that is incredible. But I would imagine it's a very, very daunting process. And this also kind of leads into a fun question. I'm going to give some context to this part. So, a year or two ago, or rather, earlier this year, a guest I had on the show named Jasmine Young posted on her social media that we are in a golden age of specifically indie authors. And I've been asking a lot of authors I've had on the show this question, but I've since broadened that to include narrators, artists, and editors, because during those 4 years in lockdown, a lot of us, were pushed to really find that passion that we've denied for so long. I began 2020 with my books, and I've never looked back. But this does lead to the discussion of whether or not we are in some kind of golden age or renaissance of independent creators. And I'm wondering if that's on the same way for narrators as well. And I've gotten some very divisive answers. Some say that we are in a golden age or renaissance. Some say that we are not. And some have even gone further and said, while there is an influx, specifically books, in the publishing world, because the industry has changed over time, that's not to say most of those books have any creative thought behind them. They were just created to exist. And sometimes for those books, I've interviewed some guests or narrators who have been a part of that, said that sometimes those books, they wish that they hadn't, because it really did nothing to help boost their brand or at least bring awareness. And sometimes it was just not that great of a book. I hate to say that, but there are some books that do need a revision or two. But getting back on track, in your opinion, Daphne, do you feel that there is, or we are in, some form of golden age for independent creators, or are we not there yet?
I think that so because I don't have a ton of history in this industry,
Mm,
I'm not sure how it's changed other than what I've seen in the last year.
right.
However, I would argue that social media has allowed people to get more views and get more attention than they would have otherwise. And there are authors that are able to publish their own books that they've tried to query but haven't had any luck. Um, and I would say there's a ton more narrators since the lockdown, right? Because people were able to do it from
Yes.
home, and so a lot more people became aware of this field.
Right.
So, golden age, I don't know. But do I think that there are more people in this industry and some are able to use it to really change their lives? I think that's true.
Absolutely. And I think also to tie it in, with like the publishing industry, how it's changed. The traditional publishing industry is still at large, but the indie industry has changed in the last 20 years where it's very professional. I would imagine in the same case for narrators, in the sense that 20 years ago, if you want to go make an audiobook back in the day, you had to vet, you had to really find the best. And most of these people, as you mentioned, Daphne, have worked in stage, they are actors, they've have done infomercials, commercials, they've honed their craft over years, and they still do that now. But with the rise of social media, it did allow other individuals who, people say, you have a natural radio voice or you have a natural sales voice. It allowed them to hone their craft and did give them a platform. So, from an author's perspective, I think maybe not a golden age, but I will say that the industry for narrators has increased greatly within the last 20 years to show more voice, but also more diversity in terms of voice work and narration. And that leads, of course, to the business side of being a narrator, which I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on, Daphne. So, as a little icebreaker question, when you decided to, fully commit to this industry and career, how much research did you really dive into to figure out, okay, what equipment do I need? What stuff do I need to pad my room? Like, how much research did you really put into to really make sure you got everything down, which you could then improve upon later?
I listened to a podcast for like 180 episodes worth.
Mm-hmm.
Which was quite a lot of listening. And that host talked a lot about just everything that goes into being a VO. And this was including commercial work, including like podcast editing, I believe. There were things about Fiverr, Upwork, all of the platforms, pay to plays. So I listened to that because he actually gave insight into what it truly looks like.
Right.
And then I also looked up online like what you need in your space, and I followed some narrators on Instagram, which when you find narrators on social media, you're seeing like the clips of us when we're having fun. You're not seeing the clips of us editing back our work and going, oh, why did that
sweat, and tears
like that? Let me go back and do a pickup for that, because why was I so flat there? And why wasn't that character's voice where it was supposed to be? And is that a lawnmower? Like, you get all of these things that you don't think about. So yeah, I researched quite a bit before I dove in. That podcast primarily helped me decide. I was like, okay, this is truly what it's going to look like. Is this something I think I can do? And honestly, a lot of the stuff I found online, some of it was accurate, but other stuff there's so much you don't know until you're actually immersed in the community.
Right. Absolutely, 100%. And then, going forward, from an author perspective, when we go into the industry, we have to think of, who is our target audience or who is our readership, because those are two different things with two very different goals. And I imagine as a narrator, you are probably given all of this information from the scripts, from the characters of what the book is, like who is being marketed towards and the target audience. But I also understand that as narrators, you also have the opportunity to help the author really see a different side, in a sense of, hey, maybe this character could go a different way, or maybe you could look at this group of readers or this audience. So I'm wondering, Daphne, have you ever had to do that in your work as a narrator? And in your opinion, from a reader's perspective, because as you mentioned earlier that you are a big reader, are you a person who reads books that are usually marketed towards a target audience, or are you more of a reader who reads books because that is targeting you, a specific readership? And does that mentality go into effect for your narration work?
Can I ask what the first part of that was again? Sorry, there's a lot to that question.
Of course. So, okay. I actually tried to rework it because as you mentioned before, as a reader, which you've mentioned, you're a big reader, and that has played a lot in your career as a VO. So I'm curious, would you typically say that you're a reader who reads books that target the target audience, the market audience, so to speak? Or are you more so of a reader that reads books that you yourself enjoy as a reader? And I'm wondering if that mentality goes into effect for your VO, in the sense that, do you narrate for the market audience that the author is trying to hit,
Mm.
or do you narrate and do voice work for specific reader types that perhaps an author did not consider?
So I would say I read books that appeal to me. So I love a romance, but I
Mhm.
also love Stephen King. So I guess I'm a mood reader to that extent. So
Right,
I don't know that I guess I would fit in the advertisement box for romance, right? Because
right,
I am a female, which is generally who they are marketing to. Not to
right,
say that men can't read romance, but I would say they're not the target audience when our authors are making posts.
right.
Um, and I would say I I don't know what the targeting efforts for Stephen King is or are, but I I love reading those books regardless. I like a little bit of variety in my life, depending on the mood. Do I have a lot of brain power present? I'll read one type. If I don't, I'll read a more surface level book without as much plot beneath it. You know? Depends on what I have going in my head that day. But I when I narrate, I don't always think about who I'm narrating to specifically. I think about doing justice to the characters and the author's work.
Mm,
I always just try and do my best to be true to the book and who those characters are. And maybe sometimes the author doesn't love a voice I picked, and so then I will rework it. So that it matches their vision. And other times they have to let me have a little bit of creative freedom so that
yes.
I can do different voices for everyone. So I think it comes down to the partnership too between
Mhm.
the narrator and the author. So like Cassandra Mall was someone fantastic to work with because she just let me have full reign on voices. And then she also, so normally after the 15-minute checkpoint, I'll give authors like 5 or so lines of, "This is exactly how I want you to say it because I've been hearing it in my head the whole time I've written this book."
Right.
Because then that's taking away some of my creative freedom, but I also want to give authors those key lines that, like, this is my my make or break line, and I want
Right.
everyone to hear it this way, and I think that's totally fair. It's your
Mhm.
baby. So
Yes.
I love doing that for authors, but like with Cassandra, she had so many jokes in her writing, and I've been known to miss a joke or two. It's just who I am. So she'd be like, Daphne, you missed this one." And I go, "Oh, yeah, I sure did. I sure did miss that joke. Let me go back and do a pickup for that so that it lands the way it's supposed to." But we have a great working relationship.
Mhm.
If I'm working with an author I don't know very well and I don't know how to read them in the situation, and then they're nitpicking everything I'm doing, that's a completely different relationship, you know?
Right. That is very true. And that actually leads to a very important thing, which is this partnership in, for, as authors, when we build our team, it's either cover artists, editors, sometimes narrators, because we want to have, a good rapport and a partnership. And it's also, I imagine, the same thing on the other side. Editors want to really work with authors. They, of course, want to help authors, but they also have to understand, or not understand, but how do I word this correctly? It's important to say, from either an editor's point of view, an artist's point of view, or a narrator's point of view, the stance to say no. And what I mean by that is, I've talked with a few editors who have mentioned stories of books that they were either contracted to work on or were at least pitched to. And sometimes the content are hitting triggers that they themselves don't want to be a part of or associate with. I imagine it's the same case for narrators. And narrators, like everyone else, has the opportunity and should have their opinions respected when it says, like, no, I do not feel comfortable saying this line, or no, I don't want to be a part of this, respectively. And I'm curious, Daphne, another two-parter, how important is it to really emphasize this, especially for anyone going into the industry? And have you had any experiences where you've had to say no to a project?
Yes, I have had to say no. But I'm going to go back to your, is this important? Absolutely, you should check in with your authors before you commit to a project as a narrator. And authors, I would love if authors, if they contained any sort of content that may be considered controversial in any way, politically or otherwise, socially, like maybe it's something that someone might just not be the best fit for, and you don't know if they're comfortable doing that. I would love if an author told me, like, hey, I am going to have characters with these types of traits. Are you comfortable narrating this type of work? Because they just might not be.
Mhm.
And there are certain things that I try to avoid, just because I don't think that I am the narrator that is best suited for those projects.
Right.
So, but I have had to say no. And for one, I don't do, like, in romance, there's, like, in some of the books, they called their man daddy, and that's just not my thing. I just am not comfortable narrating that. So I say no to books with that. And then I
Right.
also was originally contracted to do one of what was in my first lineup of books. It was going to be a sapphic romance. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Until they started comparing the women to, they were shrinking women. I was like, okay, whatever. I'm not going to yuck anyone's yum. But then they compared the shrunken woman to a child. And I went, I
Oh no.
out.
Nope.
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 Yep, we have crossed a line. I am not participating. This is not something I would ever want to be associated with.
Right. That is very true. And also from an author's perspective, today's also my fellow authors. Of course, write the story that you want to write, but also be mindful. If you're building a team and you want, let's say, this book to work, really let people know exactly what book you're working on. And if your team, let's say the team members aren't a good fit, ask them. See, are there any people you know that may be a good fit for this book? Networking, which is very, very important. And that's something that we will touch on a little bit later. Now, I'm very curious, Daphne, going forward, still talking about voiceover work. Has there been any challenges when it comes to playing certain characters? Let's say either a young woman or maybe a mythical creature, because this is a very big point that I want to make apparent for all my authors. If you're contracting narrators, my fellow authors, just be kind to them in a sense. Don't make the character voices too complex. Do not make it too difficult for them. I've been guilty of that myself for other works. Just be mindful of that. Definitely give them research and definitely give them tips. Let's say you have a specific voice that you want them to copy or at least consider, which is very, very helpful. So going back to the question, Daphne, have you had any challenges with certain character voices that you have sometimes had to talk with the author? And again, this notion of, partnership and collaboration and ultimately creative freedom, which may have led to the book being rewritten, i.e., let's say, for example, it was a YA story, but after speaking with maybe the narrators, editors, and after a few reads, had to change it to, let's say, an adult fiction story?
I have not encountered anyone having to rewrite. There may
Mm.
be some typos that got missed, even though they went through edits, because when you're reading, you don't necessarily get every single word. Well, you find that when you're reading it out loud.
Yes.
And I have authors that are like, this went through 3 rounds of edits and no one caught this. Are you kidding me?
Yes, that's happened to me.
Sorry, I'm reading out loud. I have that. I noticed. I'm so sorry. I have had a couple voices. So as I've worked, so I will say for me, creating new voices is one of my biggest challenges.
Mm.
And some narrators love creating new character voices. It is their cup of tea. And I think that's fantastic. An example of this, Steve Corona, phenomenal narrator. His record is 93 voices and 24 accents in one book. He does a lot of lit RPGs. I met him this weekend. Phenomenal guy. So amazing. Can't recommend talking to him or listening to him enough. So talented. Just amazing. I am in awe. I am in awe of him. And so I love that there are people who absolutely adore creating character voices. I am more into slight nuances just because that's who I am. But I'm always striving to get better. I'm adding new voices as I go. My first book that I had a mother voice, I had to refine it because actually it was my second book, because the first book, the mother was really mean. And so my snobby mother voice worked perfectly. And then in the next book, she was loving. And my author was like, can we make her warmer? I was like, absolutely. And so we went back and forth a couple times to refine the voice. And in the end, it worked well. So I have worked with authors on specific voices.
Awesome.
I will say, oh, sorry, Gabriel.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I will say for authors, with narrators, we like to have voices refined in the first 15 minutes. After the 15-minute checkpoint, you are giving us creative freedom to do the rest of the story, because we don't want to have to go back and fix all of the acting differences. So please, 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 in your 15-minute checkpoint, if there are things that are vital to you to know before jumping into the project, make that part of your 15-minute checkpoint. If you have multiple voices that you're very particular about for the remainder of the story, please ask your narrator to do that in the 15-minute checkpoint.
Very good point, Daphne. Very good point. And also going forward, I think it's another point to talk about, of course, the balance between, the creativity of the narrator, but also understanding the genres that you guys are in. All the same thing for authors. For authors, we want to showcase our individuality in our work, but we also have to understand the genres that we're getting in, because people, again, have expectations of how certain stories are supposed to go, how certain characters are supposed to act, and how typically the plot is supposed to follow. And 9 times out of 10, the same story has been told numerous times. I don't care what anyone says, that is the case. But that's not to say you couldn't give your own spin to it. You just have to not make it too new or too original that's going to throw the readers off. And I'm wondering, Daphne, and that's kind of the same thing for narrators and this tightrope balance where you want to showcase your voice acting abilities, but also understanding the genre that you're in. And I am wondering, Daphne, as an example, has there ever been a time that a author has specifically given you a cue saying, hey, I want you to read a book or narrate this as if it was a Brian Sanderson novel, or speak like so-and-so? Has that ever come across in your line of work?
I've never had specifics demanded, I guess, of me. Working with audio mazes is fantastic because they provide us with like YouTube clips of specific actors in, I'm trying to think of the word off the top of my head. Anyway, they give you the clip so that you know what the character's personality and voice is going for as inspiration. It doesn't have to be exactly that, but that's the direction you're heading, which is really helpful to help frame your mind as in, oh, this character is supposed to be this. I have been told on some romances to be more sultry because I have a brighter voice. I'm higher than a lot of other female narrators as far as my tone, which doesn't sound so much like it today because we have Canadian wildfire smoke outside and it's made me quite raspy. But I generally have a more Andy Arndt styled voice, or at least that's who I aspire to. And I just know I'm not as low and sultry and rich as some other narrators. So I have heard, can you be low and more sultry quite a few times. So I think I'm geared more towards rom-coms than I am like the super, super sultry books. But I always try and do my best for all of my books. So
that's nice. That's really, really good, Daphne. And I'm actually glad you mentioned audio mazes because, as I said in the beginning, viewers and listeners, Daphne and I work with audio mazes, and there's been a few guests that have been on the show recently who have also been a part of audio maze editors, narrators, as well as authors. So, Daphne, would you like to share with our viewers and listeners how you got involved with audio mazes? And to add further what you mentioned before, as a narrator, but also as an independent creator, how does it feel to be a part of a community that truly values your work and talent?
So I became part of Audio Mazes by, I actually came across Belvoir Studios Instagram page back in October or November of 2024. And Sophia, who runs Belvoir Studios, had posted about a specific organization. And she said, I don't represent them, I just recommend them. And so I messaged her, I DM'd her, and I asked her a question about it. And I said, I'm new to this, and just got the conversation started. And I said, do you mind if I ever like pick your brain sometime about being in this field for a long time because I'm new? And she said, absolutely. And so we had a call like this, and I got to ask her a whole bunch of questions, and we just kind of hit it off. And then I actually went into a city that was around her, and she had just mentioned in passing, oh no, I had seen where her business was located. And I was like, hey, I'm going to be in this general area. Would you be interested in meeting with me for coffee or something? And she was. And so I got to sit down with her for a couple hours, and we got to talk more about being a narrator and just the bookish world. And it was fantastic. I loved meeting with her. And then a couple months later, she reached out to me and she said, hey, I'm starting Audio Mazes with a co-founder. Would you like to be a part of it? And I said, absolutely. And she and Carl have made it their mission to have Audio Mazes truly value their narrators. And this isn't to put shame on anyone, but sometimes we feel like an afterthought, like the book is the spotlight. And then sometimes it's just like, oh, I'm adding an audiobook, but then the authors only post about the written book and don't post about the audiobook. And then we're like, are we as important with the audiobook form, or is it just your book and we're just the leftovers? Like, and so it's really cool that Audio Mazes treats us well. It's a great business and a great community.
That it is, Daphne. And also to add further to that, it couldn't come at a better time, especially with AI really sinking its claws into the publishing industry and the voice over industry, the narration industry, which for those who aren't in the loop of the audio world, I'll summarize it. Pretty much for narrators, it is proving to be very, very difficult to get contracts and get commissions from authors to do works, because companies are now creating AI voices to do the narrations, and that is a big no. Now, as I've talked about numerous times on the show, and I have mentioned this on camera, I have used Grammarly, which now has updated, starts to use AI in a slight way, but I have only ever used it to help, refine my outlines and refine my characters. I have never used AI to write my books. I do not agree with that, because it takes away from the authenticity of the author. And just the same way for narrators, yes, could an AI program probably sound exactly the way you imagine your character? Yes, but it's going to be very stagnant. It's going to be very flat. There's going to be no range, no emotion, no human element. So for you, Daphne, how important is it to really talk about the severity of AI in the narration world? And has that ever come across as a narrator? Let's say you're reading a book or a script, but you realize, has one ever been written by AI? Ultimately, is the question.
There is one script that I performed that I have doubts on.
Okay.
Just because of the way it was written. Unfortunately, AI writing and very, very new writers often have some overlap. So
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to say, and I would never call them out, just because that's not
Okay.
who I am.
Right.
But there was that one script, and I was like, huh. Yeah, it was also very, very difficult to narrate and make it sound good because of the formatting of the sentences, and there were some details that were just a little bit odd, but
Mm.
I now check my scripts way more closely before
Right.
I accept the project, because I just don't want to be in that situation again. For those that don't know, 1 hour of audio takes about 6 hours of work. So we put so much time into this, and if the writing is bad or it's really clunky, it takes longer. And then we're in our booth getting frustrated because a 15-minute chapter took us an hour, which is more than double the amount of time that it normally takes me to do a
Mm.
15-minute chapter. So I check it way closer now. But it's so important to me to keep AI out of creative spaces, because I mean, I always think about authors. Like, do you want someone stealing your work and taking over your, like, what you do? It like hurts my feelings to think about that. And a lot of the AI voices aren't even being farmed, if you will, legally. So what if someone steals my voice? I can't just go out and buy a new voice. It's the only one
Right.
I've got.
That is very true. That is very, very true. And I won't go into specifics, viewers and listeners, but there have been very close colleagues of myself and Daphne who have had similar instances happen to them, and it's very, very sad. And again, don't want to go into space, but it has touched home to both of us and our inner circles. And speaking of inner circles, as we mentioned earlier, for authors and narrators to get like a team to really help you is very important, to really show you the ropes, so to speak. So for you, Daphne, how important is it for young narrators or early narrators to really understand the importance of networking? And are there any people you like to give a personal shout out to who have helped you along the way?
Yes. I would say early on, Tiffany Magnuson was one of my mentors, if you will. I called her my VO big sister, and she really helped me in my first like 6 months of narration, and we're still friends to this day. Damian Knight is a
Yes.
fantastic narrator and audio engineer. And he has saved me so many times with audio quality things. Like I don't know where I'd be without him, honestly. He's a really good friend of mine, and he designed my editing chain that I use on all of my books. And the best money I've ever spent in my business, honestly. And then Sophia has been an amazing, amazing mentor in so many ways. She is just such an amazing person and an amazing boss. Like, I mean, I don't even have words to describe her. She's just killing it in her industry, and I look up to her. Trying to think of who else. I think those three have made the biggest impact for me, but I have other friends that I keep in my close circle that I look to for all kinds of things.
Nice. And also, I'm glad you mentioned Damian Knight, because I had the opportunity to interview him earlier this month on Into the Maze, and he name dropped you for this same question. And he also wanted me to let you know that he has had a blast working with you. You are an incredible narrator, and he would absolutely, in a heartbeat, love working with you again for a duet or for another project. He just wanted me to let you know that.
I mean, I feel exactly the same way. Every time I get a romance project, I'm like, hey, Damien, you want to join me, please? So I don't have to do the guy voices.
Awesome. Has that actually happened? Have you ever had to do like male voices for some stories?
Right now, I'm narrating a story where I get to be my rom-com sarcastic self, but then her counterpart is a 400-year-old vampire who is a little bit dry with an undisclosed accent.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, that's what I'm editing right now, actually.
Sweet. That's actually pretty awesome, Daphne. And we've now reached, I could talk about all these questions for you with hours, but fortunately, we've arrived at the final question of this amazing narrator interview. And this is a very loaded question, so brace yourself. So I've been doing this show both on YouTube and in the first not audible, but podcasting form. In total, 6-7 years. I have 357 videos. 159 of those have been authors. 20 of those have been editors, narrators, and agents, and many more. I've learned a lot from all the people that I've interviewed on the show. And the thing that I have learned, which applies to both authors, editors, narrators, and artists, and anyone in the creative world, is this. There are two paths presented before us every time we work on a project or begin our journey. It is to be something and to be known as something. To, let's say, be a narrator, that is someone who is dedicated to the craft, honing their skills in voice work. As you mentioned, going to acting classes, learning different characters, speech patterns, dialects, breath patterns, so forth. The second path to be known as a narrator is someone who is dedicated to the business side, honing one's craft, building their brand, showcasing their work, getting contracts, stuff like that, etc. And they, of course, lead to the same goal, which is, of course, success and fame. But just like young authors getting into the publishing industry, for anyone going into the narration industry, the second path is the most enticing, and unfortunately leads to a lot of unrealistic goals and expectations. Because just like authors, I imagine the same case for narrators, this is not a get-rich-quick industry. Will we like it to be? Absolutely. Would Daphne love to be a multimillionaire and live off the royalties of all their success? Absolutely. Would I love to do the same thing with my books? Wholeheartedly. But unfortunately, that is not the case. And the truth about this industry, the publishing industry in general, there is no guarantee the first project you work on, whether you are an editor, whether you are the author, whether you are the artist, or whether you are the narrator, no matter which of those four you are, there is no guarantee the first project you work on is going to be the start of your legacy. And that is a hard pill to swallow. Are there exceptions? Absolutely. But those are exceptions. Those are 1 in 1,000 chance that that book or that series of books are going to be successful, both financially and in the world of pop culture. And it can be very difficult to really contemplate that. So here's this scenario, Daphne. Let's do a little RP really quick. Let's say you are at an event, let's say in your hometown, or you've been invited to a convention, and you are doing a conference on getting into narration, and you have a bunch of people who are, entering level narrators or people who have done small work in the narration world, in the voice acting world. How would you explain to them that in the industry of narration and VO work, that while there may not be a guarantee your first work is going to be the start of your legacy, it should not be seen as a sign of failure, but instead be seen as a stepping stone, because grit transforms into talent. And just the same mentality for authors. It may be your 4th work that you've been a part of, maybe the 15th book that you've been a part of. Whatever book or project that you're a part of, one of those will be the start of your legacy. And once you reach there, you'll be able to look back and see the success and the hard work that led you to that point.
I always think that one should look at how to improve. And that can just be even for yourself, but for anything. As a human, I'm always trying to improve who I am and improve what I do. That can be how I treat others. That can be how can I keep my house more organized? How can I spend more time with family and do well in my business? But the foundation of who I am is to treat others with respect and treat them in the way that I hope that they treat me. And while you mentioned that you would love to be, you'd love to be famous and have more money from your works, and like I would obviously feel the same way. You have to look at things in a light that's not cynical. You can't be like, well, I haven't made it, so I should stop. I think you should always be realistic, but I think you should always work to use the data that you have to improve upon what you are doing. And sometimes it doesn't always lead us to the results that we're looking for, but what are the beautiful things that we can see along the way? And sometimes that's hard to do. I mean, sometimes I'm like, why am I not on with more publishers? Like, I'm just with Audio Mazes. Well, there's a lot of people that are very talented trying to get into those places. And like I mentioned earlier, I don't have a whole lot of like acting background besides the classes I did the first year that I was narrating. But I have to look at myself and how I am improving and be proud of that. So was there something else you were looking for that I was missing?
No. That actually is very, very, very true, Daphne. And maybe also to add to that, from an author's perspective, you have to really understand, do you want to get into this industry to make money and grow a brand? Or do you want to just, create something and share with friends and family? I imagine the same thing for narrators who go into this industry and really have to make and answer that first question. Do they want to be a narrator that just does, skits or scripts on their social media that's sent to them for fun because they enjoy that? Or do they want to go the other way and build their career, build their brand? Because that is really important, and that, sets the goals and expectations. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. And you know what? I would be very happy with somewhere in the middle. Like I'm happy with where I'm at in my trajectory now.
Mm.
But I would love to be in a place where I don't always have to audition to get books, or maybe I'm having the audition sent to me and I'm getting just a steady stream from a publisher at a rate that is sustainable for the time that I'm
Mm.
putting in.
Right.
That is ultimately my goal. As I would love to be where Andy Arndt is today, but I don't think that's a realistic expectation. I'm not saying I won't try for it, but I don't think that that's likely, right? Like she
Right.
is a pillar in Macmillan, that's a huge
Yes.
position to be in. And I would love to just be in a position where I'm getting sent books at the rate that at a not even like a high end rate, at a reasonable rate for the time I'm putting in. That would
Absolutely.
ultimately be my realistic goal.
That is beautifully said, Daphne. Beautifully said. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing narrator interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Daphne Winters for making her official debut on the Wandering Scribe podcast, as well as making her first debut on a podcast ever. And hopefully, this will not be the last time we have her on the show. Daphne, thank you again so much for coming on the show. I greatly appreciate it. Where can people find you to reach out and connect? And do you have any upcoming projects you like to announce that are slated to be released this year or the next year?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Gabriel. I would love to be back anytime that you wish. I've enjoyed this interview very much. I'm working with an author named Lee Fields currently, and we're producing a multicast for her series. Um, she allowed me to be her project manager for that series, and it's my first time project managing, and it's her first time producing audiobooks. So we're working together on this journey, and I think it's going to be amazing. She has like 8 or 9 books out already, and she honestly is just crushing it. I am super impressed with her. She has great writing, she has great stories, and I highly recommend everyone check her out. That multicast series will be coming out between the first book is almost done being produced. So between like I would say a couple months from now and then next spring is when the 4th book will be completed for the Shadow Dragon series. She has a couple other books being produced right now in audio, and they'll be out. One will be out later this year, and the other will probably be out early next year, would be my guess. People can find me at Daphne Winters _narrator on Instagram, and that's primarily where I am. I am also on TikTok. I prefer Instagram. Just because maybe it's my age. I don't know. I appreciate Instagram more just because of the ease of use, and it's what I'm used to, and I don't want to change what I'm doing. But I'll probably be on TikTok more because I know it's a great platform. I just have to get out of my habits. But I'd say primarily find me on Instagram. I have my link tree there. You can find all my other socials in my website through that link as well.
Awesome. And one final thing. Firstly, are there any Audio Maze books we can expect from you down the road?
Yes. I should highlight Audio Mazes. I was on Conspiracy where Conspiracy. Sorry, I said that incorrectly. I missed the N. I played a ridiculous, bubbly character who sounded a bit like a character from Total Drama Island, if you recall watching that series growing up. I totally played off of Lindsay, and I had so much fun. And then in the upcoming stories, I will be in the Pistol Pete story coming up, as well as Beverly Birch's Galactic Greenhouse. I am going to be panicking at strange plants.
Nice.
Yes.
Awesome. I'll make sure to include those down below in the description of this video. And one final thing, Daphne, hate to put you on the spot, but I haven't done this in a while since Sophia was on the show. I'm going to ask you to read a line I'm going to tell you. It's actually from my upcoming book,
Okay.
Decimus, the Wolf of Rome. And for context for this character, this is almost like she is the goddess of revenge. She's a ghostly figure. She's not malicious, but she's in the middle. And the line is, we cannot save everyone, but everyone can save someone.
My short-term memory is bad, so it might. Can you drop that in the chat? So sorry. There's a reason I look at a script, and this is, I mean, besides the fact that I have no acting experience, this is why I'm not on TV acting, because I can't remember anything.
And don't worry, this will be cut out. This whole thing will be cut out, so it will be seamless. Don't worry.
Okay. I was trying to make it entertaining if it wasn't, but
if not, I'll leave it in. There we go.
Neutral-ish, but the goddess of revenge.
Yes.
We cannot save everyone, but everyone can save someone.
Oh, love that. Absolutely love that. If you love that and more, make sure to follow Daphne Winters at her socials down below. And also, if you enjoyed her segment for Michael, which he did for the Human Voices movement, make sure to get a copy of Michael, Last Angel of Earth. And with that, everybody, thank you again for joining us for another amazing interview here on the show. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And as always, is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful afternoon wherever you are in the world. And until next time, we'll see you all in the next episode.